Hello, everybody, and good evening. Welcome to the City of Edina's presentation on flood risk reduction management for the Morningside neighborhood. My name is Cole Dorius, and I'll be moderating today. I want to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. This is being recorded, so it's for everybody who cannot attend, so we want to post it online. So if you're not comfortable with that, keep your mics off. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, the website has many ways to get in touch with us. You can also use the chat box on the bottom here if you want to leave a question, and just get in touch with us. That's great. Now I want to turn it over to Ross Bittner to start the presentation.
Thanks, Cole. I'm going to bring up my screen here. So I'm Ross Bittner. I'm the Engineering Services Manager with the City of Edina. Today we're going to be talking about our next step in our flood infrastructure project for the Morningside neighborhood. We've already met Cole, but I'm going to be joined by several others throughout our conversation here. My presentation outline is on the left. The first two items are going to be review from our prior meeting. And then we're going to talk about our revised design, some benefits, trade-offs, and costs of that design. And then we're going to have a discussion and talk about next steps. So with me today is Jessica Wilson, the Water Resource Coordinator with the City of Edina. Also joining me is Corey Anderson, Water Resource Engineer with BAR, and he met Cole. Also on our project team is Sarah Stratton, Senior Water Resource Scientist at BAR Engineering. So let's get into the context. This came out of a project where the City of Edina defined our flood risk reduction strategy. And in it, we used the Morningside neighborhood and a task force to delve into specific pieces of the programs that the City of Edina uses to provide flood benefit. We're going to focus on two of those tonight. One is infrastructure. It really is the focus of our project. We want to find ways to renew that infrastructure and bring it into its next life cycle. The last time the flood infrastructure in Morningside was done, it was the late 60s. And the design lives of those systems are usually about 50 years. So we're coming up on a time to renew. The other one is outreach and engagement. We'll go into how we understand flooding, but outreach and engagement is an important part of this because half of the flooding equation depends on you. We want to make the flooding information available to the public and give residents the tools they need to help reduce their own risk as well. We view flood risk through a variety of lenses. Several of the flood risk factors include the natural environment, how high the water might get, and how exposed any individual asset is on the landscape, and how vulnerable any asset that is exposed is to flood waters. We also have a good sense for what's changing our flood risk. Climate change is the lead driver, and aging infrastructure is the second. There's also a couple issues related to development and our regulatory program, well-drained landscapes, and imperviousness that affect flood risk as well. There's a variety of pathways for flooding, and this is how we understand flooding risk for structures. Water can come through the surface, which is obvious, but it can also come through sanitary sewers, backflow, or groundwater pressure. We're engaging through our Better Together strategy and on the Better Together Edina website. If you're watching it now, you know all about this. If you're watching it live, you've probably been involved with this conversation as we've been having it since about March of this year. But if you're new to the conversation, that's okay. We can help catch you up. We want to make sure that this information goes out wide, so we could use your help to talk to your neighbors and help us bring more awareness to the conversation. Because the choices that we make in this project will affect the neighborhood for the next 50 years and the next life cycle of that infrastructure. So get involved. Thank you for engaging with us. We've had many different types of engagement in this process, including some face-to-face in-field meetings. Those were 2 official ones. We've also had site visits with people and many calls, thousands of visits to the website, an interactive map, postcards going out neighborhood wide, and we're trying to draw more attention to that using our social media channels. We also have a variety of videos, including these public meetings, but also videos of some of our modeled risk information. We've also had 2 expert technical panels to start to vet some of the ideas that we've had here so that we're moving forward with confidence. We've heard a variety of concerns expressed during this project, and here are several. The 2 I've got highlighted, flooding experience on individual properties, really reminds me that flooding is a personal issue. People have structures, investments that they've put in, their own place of well-being. Personal safety can be at risk in flooding. And the interrelations and causes of flooding can be complex. We all want to know how we can do better, how we can be better protected, and how any individual proposal that we're looking at today might affect our individual property. And we're going to be able to provide some good neighborhood-wide information. But if your issues become so specific, or if you really want to dig into one piece of our project, just know that we can always take your call. We've had dozens of conversations, and we've been recording those on that same Better Together site to give you a flavor of what some of the concerns are of other residents. The other concerns listed there, the choices we make have consequences, and there's going to be not just benefits, but costs and trade-offs as well. And those can be unevenly distributed in the neighborhood. And we want to acknowledge that and make sure that we understand those so that we can make the right precautions and mitigate those effects. Why now? Well, the Morningside neighborhood has 2 major street reconstructions or neighborhood street reconstruction projects planned in the 2022 and 2023 timeframe. And the time to think about new infrastructure is ahead of the planning process of those major street reconstructions or neighborhood reconstruction projects. We're going to be planning, finishing this planning process up, making some decisions and moving into design. Here's a map of our engagement process as we've laid it out. And you can see we're now into the winter of 2020, where we're going to be sharing some of those refined concepts that are using community feedback and starting another conversation where we can gain further community feedback. All of this input really will help inform staff's recommendations to the decision makers, and it will help the decision makers understand the costs, benefits, and trade-offs from your perspective. So get involved. Tell us what you think. Make sure your voice is heard. Make sure we understand where you're coming from and what you think of our options. Our infrastructure goals: to safely remove and store floodwaters by repairing and upgrading neighborhood infrastructure so that we can share benefits and risks neighborhood-wide. This was an important concept that we learned from 3 of the scenarios that we ran and we shared with you in our last public meeting and in the park talking to you individually. Those 3 scenarios that taught us about the balance were our storage, pipes, and combined scenarios. We learned that we can transfer risk and do good for flooding for the upstream areas. But that risk transfers down to the lower areas, and we need to be able to create storage in excess of the risk that we transfer. and create a balance so that everyone benefits. 2 scenarios taught us about value. We looked at pumping options and specific graded overflow options. And the value that we learned about was, where the storage matters and how that storage can be made more valuable through engineering and timing of flows and storage. And your stories also helped us to find the best fit and to change our options and to figure out where the value could be created and what trade-offs we're willing to make. So what have we tried so far? Those scenarios that are in our prior tech memo, pipes, storage, surface overflows, ponds, pumping, and our combined scenario, have given us a good sense for how to move around this large amount of water that can be pooling on the landscape and causing risk during flood events. These are flood events that we've seen over the course of the last 30-some years, with 87 being the flood of record. So here's where our review ends, and we're going to get into our revised design. And I'm going to talk about it generally at first, but here's a picture of it. The project that we're in is about getting to decisions about big pieces and big parts. We call it like a 30% level design. With this design, we're not ready to go out and get a contractor and start building. We don't have the level of detail that might be down to the individual property level, but we wanted to at least know where the big parts are so that we know we can inform the investment that we're considering. So as I mentioned, there's 2 key parts of the strategy. One is storage and the other is pipes. For the storage component, our design looked at all of these storage areas. The 2 in blue, Weber Pond and the Lynn and Kipling Inundation area, are key components of the current system, and our designs look at improving and enhancing both of those for flood effects. But we also see opportunities to make those better for natural resource habitat and other clean water benefits. And we'll describe those in more detail as we go through each component. We also looked at storage on the land. And in that case, we worked and got permission from the 2 schools, Avail Academy and Susan Lindgren, to include areas on their property in our planning project. And we also looked at potential for use of components or parts of Weber Field. So these 5 areas are where we looked at storage. Now let's move on to the pipes. The pipe segments are shown in dashed lines here, and I think of them kind of moving upstream from east to west. And maybe we'll start on the north for this list, but 40th and Inglewood, the possibility there is that we can move water from west to east to try to bypass some of the low areas between Monterey and Grimes. And then we've got the Kipling to Grimes overflow. It's the first, it's the outlet to the inundation area, and we look at additional pipe capacity draining that inundation area. We look at the Monterey to Lynn overflow from the Susan Lindgren School and Monterey Avenue east to the inundation area. Now in the southern flow paths, we look at, in blue, a very long section of pipe from 42nd Street and Weber Pond, west on 42nd Street, south on Crocker to Morningside Road, and then around to Branson Street, sorry. Extensive pipe networks that go up into the hills south of the map area here and off the map. The other is the 42nd and Scott Terrace and Alden disconnect. That's the red dash on this line. areas that had flood risk from water backing up from Scott Terrace and Alden Drive and from Weber Pond itself. So those are the pipes that would transfer risk down into these low areas, and then the prior was the storage that we create in those low areas. Now we're going to take you on a tour here, and we're going to come back to this slide. And for this tour, Corey Anderson with Bar Engineering is going to join me. Corey is the lead designer with Bar, and he really has some of the specific knowledge that will help us describe some of the benefits and some of the trade-offs from each of these components. But before we actually step through those tour elements, we're actually, instead of one option here, we're actually looking at 3 different levels of design. And we're still working on a name, but if we named them by the benefits, we'll call them good, better, and best. If we named them by the sizes, it would be big, bigger, and biggest. And then if we named them by the costs, we might use some 3 and 4 letter words, but those are some large numbers, 5, 10, and $15 million in capital infrastructure and design costs. So staying on a positive note, we're going to refer to these as good, better, and best. Although when we start to get to our conclusions, we might start to question some of those names. So, Corey, are you ready to start stepping through on number 1?
Sure. Thanks, Ross.
Yeah, welcome. So we're going to start at the bottom of the hill, and on the east side of the map, number 1 is Weber Pond itself. And you can see from the image here, we've got a little mini map on the right. This Weber Pond is expanded in all of the options, big, bigger, and biggest, or good, better, and best. And maybe, Corey, you could describe a little bit about what we're thinking and the benefits behind expansion of Weber Pond.
Yeah, the expansion of Weber Pond is one of the more or most critical elements of the flood risk reduction in this whole neighborhood. Reducing the risk to the homes around Weber Pond required expanding the pond and lowering the flood levels. But not only that, with, as Ross has pointed out, the transfer of risk from upstream, as we're trying to reduce flooding upstream, moving all that water down here required expansion even more. So the pond here is shown as quite a bit bigger, and is also lower to provide that much more storage available.
So as we detail these out with more specificity, we're going to be creating a technical memo, and we'll be sharing more of this online to get the conversation going. We'll be having meetings with properties in particular. But the Weber Pond, as you see it here, might be an example of our biggest or the best option using that vernacular. From our prior design, we took away all the flood walls. We didn't really see the value there. We thought it was more valuable to actually enhance the pond itself. We see opportunities with this to make the water quality of the pond much better, and the pond a much better resource by opening it up to views. The water body expands north into the Weber Woods, and that comes out of the trade-off of tree removal. We tried to stay in the low area of the Weber Woods and away from the hilled area. The hilled area has a lot of older growth oaks on it and high quality trees, where the lower area was a lot more volunteer trees, such as cottonwoods and box elder. So we tried to keep into the area that had the lower value trees, but that's something that we still need to better understand as we get into the design. The lowering of the pond itself actually was critical in creating the amounts of storage for the better and best options. that is done by creating a stormwater lift station that would actually pump out of this pond. And that stacking of water on a now lowered water body can really give us those flood volumes we need in an efficient manner. Is there anything else we should talk about here before we move on to our next tour component, Corey?
I think that's good.
One other thing came to mind. So the picture here that we've got, we're obviously rendering some ideas. One of the concepts would be to include some sort of walking trail connected through the woods. And this shows a bridge coming in from what's the 41st Street right away and then west onto the hill. So our second stop in the tour is going to be the Weber Park Swale. So the concept here is that in the very high flows, we need more capacity so that Grimes Avenue and Avail Academy and some of the park isn't flooded. And we need a stable flow path to bring some of that water down to the new lower Weber Pond. So here we have a rendition of what that might look like. That would include a trail alignment and some plantings. It provides it provides that flood overflow, but it could also provide some clean water benefit. And it both uses and creates active space. It would mean some trade-offs to the configuration of both the pleasure and the hockey rink. And we definitely would need a way to get from the warming shelter over it to those two facilities. So that's not pictured here. Corey, could you tell us a little bit more about the benefits or anything else you think is important about this design?
Yeah, the goal of this particular feature is if we have a goal of moving water from these upstream areas, in this case from directly west to the pond where we've created the storage, this is that critical piece to take any of the water from that Grimes and 41st area through the park and get it to the pond. Otherwise, as water pools there and spills into the park, it will spread diffusely over a flatter surface. Whereas if we put a swale like this, we can contain it, put it in a linear feature, and more confine the flow and direct it to the pond. And these open channel surface flow type features versus a pipe are just more efficient at moving the water.
Right. I think the other key component is it's not something that we designed to flow during all events. We don't want it flowing during a small event, but we want that capacity to be available when the really big event comes. So, maybe it's a 2-inch event that starts to turn on the faucet here, and you start to see some water flow. And the very big, 6+ inch event is where you see maybe the trail would be unusable. All right, let's move on to our next component here. And here we're going to be looking at the pipes and the emergency overflow from Kipling Avenue to Grimes, kind of into the top of that swale. Number 3 is the Kipling to Grimes overflow. So here what we see is a construction photo. And sorry, we haven't had time to let the artists take their work here, so we're going to have to use our imaginations. But here we foresee a box culvert, and somewhere between 4 feet tall and 10 feet wide. The example that I was able to find on the web here that you see a photo of might be a little bit bigger than that. And it's also very exposed when it's being put in. But when it's finished, you wouldn't see it from the road. But if you were actually in the park at the top of that swale that we just described, or if you were over in the inundation area between Lynn and Kipling, you might see this opening. And the opening here isn't finished. It would also include a fence above, contoured slopes on the side, and a metal safety grate. So natural critters can go through, but none of the critters that you own were going to go in there. So, Corey, what do we need to know about this in terms of the benefits and the function?
Yeah, the function of this particular feature is to take the high flows and bypass them underground rather than over the surface. That inundation area between Lynn and Kipling, as the condition is now out there today, as a big flood comes through and that pond rises, it naturally spills out over the ground and will go between homes because those are the pathways out when the pipe that exists now is overwhelmed. So this additional capacity would eliminate those over surface flows between homes and instead put those high excessive flows then through this box culvert, as you see in that graphic down in the bottom right, under the ground over to that swale, which then would route it to the pond.
Thanks. Yeah, and as we think about the benefits, we'll be showing some kind of before and after flood risk maps towards the end of these presentations and after the tour, so we can go into some of those benefit questions with a little bit more detail as well. Thanks, Corey. All right, the next stop on our tour is going to be the Lynn and Kipling Inundation area, and that's number 4. So the Lynn and Kipling Inundation area, we've got a picture of what that might look like on the left side there. The concept is that we would lower the water body about 1.5 feet to the current pipe elevation that currently sits kind of under an embankment on the north side of the facility. We would expand the open water and we would enlarge the flood storage there. That would mean that a lot of the trees that volunteered and have grown there would be removed. There's some opportunity here for wetland and prairie habitat restoration. We heard a lot from folks who live around this that the natural resource benefit is really important, and the trees are actually a key part of that for some of the wildfowl that live in the area. Here we show what that might look like with newer and smaller trees planted along the edges, more open water, and wet prairie along the sides. What do we need to know about the benefits and the issues with this one, Corey?
Yeah, this area in particular right now serves as flood storage, and it will continue to be that. The thing we're primarily focusing on here is to expand its capacity to store water, hence the kind of cleaning it up and opening up spatially the area and also lowering it so that it has a lower starting level and can store that extra 1.5 feet before anything changes. And as you see in the picture, also included in sort of that cleaning up and clearing out is hopefully making a nicer looking and better functioning habitat.
Right. And I think when it comes to the level of the design, we haven't gone into those details yet, but we definitely see an opportunity there. So we're hoping to continue that conversation and hear what kind of values this could have for people. So we'll move on with our tour, and this is going to be to the Monterey and Lynn overflow. The story here is very similar to the other overflow. Monterey to Lynn is a component that might be a little less important, and it falls out of some of our bigger or better options. Sorry, out of our smaller ones with less budget. The the pipe here could be a little bit smaller. It's carrying a little bit less flow, and the same type of description from the prior one applies. Anything else to note here, Corey?
No, I think that's good. The function is the same, and as you pointed out, it is not part of the big or the bigger alternatives, but only the biggest.
Good. Yeah, and we've got a slide later on that we can summarize too that show which components start to come in and out. But generally, the further we work up this train, the less components are in some of the smaller or the good option. So our next tour location is number 6, and that's the Susan Lindgren School field. Here the concept was, is there a way to work with the values of a sports field to have something that's well drained, that's nice and flat, and has really good drainage. And the example here is from golf, but we imagine something similar for a flat play field. Here in our only in our biggest option did this actually come in play, where we lowered the field, installed drainage, and then tried to keep it dry in the smaller events, and then have a limited amount of flooding in the larger events. What else do we need to know about this one, Corey?
Yeah, one of the big thoughts with this particular area was that as things are today, there's a low spot right there on Monterey Avenue. And as that low area where the catch basins are becomes overwhelmed in large storms, flow would first go east into the parcels to the east, instead of west into this grassed area, because there's a little bit of a high spot there in the northeast corner of that park. So lowering this would allow for water to preferentially then go west into the park versus into those properties to the east. And as Ross pointed out, really it would be primarily used when the pipes that already go through that area are overwhelmed in the larger events, the 25-year or 10-year events. Then they'll might back up and use this area for storage rather than trying to send that either over through houses or between houses or through the pipes to the storage areas downstream.
Thanks, Corey. All right, the next stop in our tour is now we just finished out the 1 to 6, the numbers in red. Now we're going to be moving up to the northern flow path, and this includes the Avail Academy Field and the 40th Street Grimes and Inglewood storm sewers. The first stop in that is the Avail Academy Field. Here, again, very similar concept to the last time. I don't think we need to belabor that. This one floods more often in smaller events, and it has some risk in the very large events of staying underwater for a long time when the water from this one actually equalizes with Weber Pond itself. This is one that we see a little bit lower value in and is only included in the biggest option. Number 8 is the 40th Street Grimes and Inglewood storm sewer. The idea here is to take and divert water from those upper areas to try to relieve some of the areas between Monterey and Grimes of the flooding. This one again, because it's the belt and the suspenders, it has a little bit less value, and it only was in our biggest option. We'll move through now to the purple, the south flow paths. And I think we've got a lot to say about number 9. Number 9 is a large section of pipe, and it goes all the way from a new and expanded Weber Pond west on 42nd Street to to Crocker, south on Crocker off the map up to Morningside Road, and around the corner to Branson. This one varies in size depending on how much flood storage we're able to create at Weber. It also has the potential to serve as an alternate to the number 2 overflow in the smallest event, or the smallest option, the big option. So we're going to take a peek at what that might look like, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here. What do we need to know about this 42nd Street Cracker and Branson pipe, Corey?
Ross, I think the biggest points about this is that it is providing a lot more capacity for those upstream or southern parts of the neighborhood. There are pockets here and there of flooding that if there was a little more capacity in the pipes and a little more catch basins or inlets to let water into storm sewer, that water would stay off the surface and be conveyed down to the park and to the pond more easily through this sort of upsizing and increased capacity in this pipe system. As Ross pointed out, it's biggest in the biggest option, and in the bigger, we maintained the pipes all the way to Branson, but there were smaller and less inlets to reduce the cost. And then in the big option, the pipes don't extend even all the way to Morningside Road. They run along Crocker, but stop somewhere on the map as shown in the bottom right, just because of the cost of extending these pipes and increasing the capacity. I believe it's important to note that adding these pipes is an important piece at this time because of the road reconstruction, and making them large at this time allows for even more connections down the road or in years to come, if need be.
Right. The example that we show here on the side is an example of some of the smaller diameter pipe that you might see under the road. And again, it's a construction example. The pipe, the main body of this pipe itself would actually be a good deal deeper than the picture shown and a lot bigger diameter. So we're going to be doing our work to better describe, the extents of this, but I think Corey's point is well taken. The pipe in the bigger and biggest option, in the good, better, and best benefit options, it gets bigger in size itself in diameter, but it also extends further with each option. And with the smallest option, what we're calling the big option, because it's $5 million, the pipe itself and the amount of work that needs to be done, we just can't buy as much of it, or maybe we can't buy as much as we'd like. So we couldn't extend the benefits as far up, and that one leaves Branson Street essentially with the existing conditions. So we can go into
Ross, if I can say one more thing with that. I think when trying to limit the cost to around 5 million, then we have choices of what do we eliminate. And in this case, if we left all the big pipes in, we would need to eliminate storage capacity in the pond area. And at that point, risks are not well balanced because we're sending water to the park very well, but not handling it very well in the park area. And so in trying to set cost around 5 million, this was the balance in having storage in the park and additional capacity.
Great point. Thanks for adding that, Corey. Yeah, this really did come down to some of the balancing act between the cost, the benefits, and the risks. All right, so we'll probably have more to say about that one as we better describe it in our technical memo and our website, but maybe we'll just leave it there for now. Number 10, this one, it's a clever little connection of pipe, or disconnection of pipe, I should say, and this one's the Alden Scott Terrace 42nd Street disconnect. The idea here, as you can see in the mini map, the current flow path of that 42nd Street pipe actually heads out between those group of 2 homes and other 2 homes. And the backwater from Weber Pond itself actually backs up into the area south of 42nd Street. And this area was giving us a lot of trouble in some of the earlier scenario development, where some houses in this area were actually increasing in risk during our scenarios. Um, this disconnect was a way to actually provide benefit uh, from Weber into this area of Morningside neighborhood and correct that issue where we were seeing homes that were experiencing increase in risk. What else do we need to know about this one, Corey?
The only piece I would add to it is that the pipe that is coming from the west on 42nd Street used to connect to this red dashed line, carrying a lot of flow all the way from the southern and west portions of the neighborhood into this intersection that's very low. And so as you see here, the blue dashed lines and the red dashed lines now are disconnected, and that large flow from the west is redirected more directly to the pond rather than through this intersection where there was not happening, and it was a way to limit the amount of flow that has to go through those red colored pipes on this map.
Thanks. All right. The last one is number 11, stop number 11, and these are the Weber Park options. And I'll talk about those quickly. We looked at options to lower the fields and to do something very similar to what we were talking about on the 2 school properties, where in small storms they wouldn't be utilized, but in the very large storms they would flood for a portion of time. And here, similar to those other 2 stories, we only included this in the biggest option, and just because the value just wasn't as high. And we started to get into some trade-offs on the fields that it's just a lot of money for a very infrequent storm event. And it was competing with the next door, Weber Park or Weber Pond options that were providing a lot more benefit. So we're going to show a couple summary documents here and then some of the benefit slides, and then we'll be ready to move to questions. So this is my very quick way to show what's in of each one of those scale and reach questions. So we call them the benefits, good, better, best, or big, bigger, biggest, and the size. The Weber Pond itself was key. The inundation is key. The 42nd Street pipe was key. But then as we start to, from there build on, what's next. The Swale through the park and the Kipling to Grimes overflow started to come in. The extension of the pipe down on through Crocker and down to Branson comes in. And then only with the biggest options do we start to add any of that field storage or go further west than Lynn. So these are scenarios that we're just finishing up here. They may be modified slightly in our final design document so that we can really flesh out what has the most benefit at varying levels of scale. Our current summary of the benefits. Here we have a table that shows status quo in the first column, good, better, best, or big, bigger, biggest from left to right. And similar to how we reported on the scenarios, we're showing the approximate amounts of structures that are removed from risk and have reduced risk. And as we get into the benefit mapping, you'll see these with a little bit more detail. We also show an annualized benefit determination that we created using our risk model. We might come back to this slide during our conversation, but I think it starts to get to both the question of balance and the question of scale and the question of value. Right now, if you were to ask me where our staff recommendation is going to fall, I'd say, the funding may only allow for that first option, good or big, $5 million in capital is about what we see the size of this neighborhood, or maybe 4 to 6 million in capital. Um, it definitely provides good benefit, but it doesn't extend it to every area. Maybe the balance point is somewhere, we'd like to see it somewhere closer to the big or better, but that's also going to take some questions about the funding and the resources. In each one of these, we're making trade-offs about the flooding, and trees and park space are some of the key both trade-offs and opportunities. We definitely hit an inflection point on some of the between the latter two options, where we're just not getting the benefit for the extra cost. And while we do remove more homes and reduce it from more homes, we start to see diminishing returns. So now let's get into the option, or the benefit maps. These are similar to what we showed during the last scenario, and I just wanted to orient you to the page here. The Morningside neighborhood isn't shaped like a PowerPoint slide, so I had to cut it in half to fit the format. On the left side, you have the southern part of the neighborhood, and then if you were to like scroll to the south and look south, that actually is in smaller inset on the right. So you can see the Morningside and Branson areas on the right side of the map. And I think I have to use the same warning that I said last time. The digital elevation model and the elevation of individual homes on this map are an approximation. We feel like this is a good tool for testing these scope and scale ones. But if you have questions about your individual home and have specific information about the elevation of the home, comparing the model elevations of our flood risk to that actual number would be much better than this. So if you see your or your neighbor's home or a friend's home that's in a red color, or maybe comes out of risk in some of the options, it may or may not be accurate. We are making assumptions about the elevation of home and the risk of them. We don't have survey level data for all of the homes in the neighborhood. Some of it is survey level from our permitting process. Anything to think about here, Corey, as we look at the existing problem and before we step through each one of the options?
The only thing I would point out is the different modes of flooding maybe we considered. That homes are colored here lighter to darker based on flood risk. And that flood risk includes not only what might be at the surface through an entryway, but potentially effects into basements from high groundwater nearby, or even through sanitary systems.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And as we get into the benefit options on the next slides, I think Corey and I are both engineers, and we would have really loved to been able to say this is going to be cheap and we can turn all the homes green and reduce all the risk. But especially those, the surface side, I think we're doing really good work on these. But the sanitary risk and the groundwater risk, there just is no substitute for elevation for some of those risks. And those might also be a lot more appropriate for some of our other vulnerability reducing measures that we're helping to inform people about through our flood risk page and through this effort as well. So great point, Corey. Thanks for mentioning that. All right, so we have the existing map here, and I'm going to page back and forth between the good. You can see that we've got some homes that are shown in green. Remember the caveat. We met one of our design goals, which was, make sure that we don't make it worse for anybody. The extent from the existing to the good option also shows lesser extent of flooding. But as we mentioned, we couldn't afford a pipe all the way up to Branson Street, so you don't see risk getting or coming down on Branson and Morningside Road. We also don't expand further west. There's still water going through Kipling and Grimes. And let's move on to the better and now we'll look at 3 different slides as we rotate. Here we expand even further in Weber Pond, and we've got additional homes removed from risk. Again, we've met that same design goal of homes no additional risk, and the extent of the surface flooding is going down. And then the biggest, or the best option as we're calling it, here you see even less extensive surface flooding, more homes reduced, and then some of the grading work that's done in Weber Pond, Susan Lindgren, and Vail Academy. So we have these maps here, and we're only showing a single event in these just to demonstrate it. But this is something that we encourage people to get in touch with. We're going to have videos of the flood risk so that you can compare existing to any one of these proposed models. We're also going to have these type of maps for each option as we finalize that technical memo. We'll be putting some of the draft stuff on the page soon, and then as the technical memo finalizes and becomes available, we'll be putting that on as well. And it also includes smaller storms and larger storms. So we model all the way up to what we're calling the 0.2% probability event. It's about 10 inches, or maybe something like a future climate change scenario, all the way down to a smaller event like a 20% probability event, or a 3.5 some inch event. So existing, good, better, best. People are going to want to spend a little bit of time with these, and yeah, we understand that they take a little bit of time to digest. But I think generally you'll see, where we can afford to make the investments, we are definitely removing surface flooding. It's not perfect. We can't take away some of the other types of modes of flooding. And we hope that we've got a good balance here that helps both, the lowest homes on France Avenue to some of the highest homes up on Branson for some of the bigger options. So we're going to briefly describe some of our next steps, and then we're going to bring Cole back so that we can start to get some questions and discussion going. So again, this is a part of our project where we're presenting these refined concepts. We're hoping this generates discussion with people. We can get more input. We're going to use that input to put the finishing touches on our staff recommendation and our engagement report. You will see the technical memo be finalized within the next month or so. You'll see a engagement report finalized within the next several months. And then we will be working towards our staff recommendation and a presentation to the City Council sometime in the spring of 2021. All of those dates are going to be available as we have them and as we plan them. So we're hoping that the discussion with the neighborhood really starts to pick up over the next several months as we finalize those documents and finalize our final recommendation. So Cole, you want to come back on and we can start getting to some questions and roundtable discussion.
Hi, that was great. Thank you. We do have some questions here. One is about funding. Where will the funding for this project come from? Will it be funded at all by special assessment?
Great question. All right, so we welcome back Corey and Jessica for this part of the conversation. Jessica, do you want to take the funding question?
Sure. So we have a stormwater utility fund. So if you look at your utility bill that you get on a quarterly basis, there's a line item in there for your stormwater utility. And that's where the funding for this project would come from, is that fee that everyone citywide pays into. The street reconstruction project has a special assessment where you're paying for that road portion of the project. So I think that's where that question may be coming from, is will this be included with, will the cost of this additional stuff be included with that street reconstruction cost? And it will not. No part of this stormwater management or flood risk reduction infrastructure would be included in any special assessment.
Great. We also have a question about sequencing. How would sequencing of the components work for construction? What could be built with the street reconstruction projects, and what has to wait?
Right. Corey, you want to take the first crack at this one?
Sure, I'll speak to it. I think, as we mentioned early on, the work in Weber Pond and Weber Park area upstream areas without creating the storage to take that flow first. So I think the pipes under the roads would be part of it. Storage in Weber Pond would have to come at the same time.
Right. When I think about an early slide I shared with the area too, we plan right now the Morningside D and E neighborhoods first, and those are upstream areas where we would potentially be building some of that 42nd Street and Crocker Pike. So we would want to be creating the storage in the park at the same time or ahead of that. If we chose to put in the pipes before the storage, we could be in a situation where there would be a lot more risk being transferred than the storage could make up for, and that would lead to a situation that we really don't want to promote, which is a worse flood risk situation for some.
All right. We also have a question about blue algae. There's been a deadly outbreak of toxic blue algae in Edina. The new proposed Weber Woods pond would increase water flow from lawns and parks using fertilizers. How would and will concentrate the risk of toxic blue algae? This is a park that wildlife, migrating birds, and dog use. How will Edina mitigate and address this risk?
Yeah, we've had some toxic blue-green algae blooms in the Lake Cornelia basin, and the cause of that is a really short answer is extra phosphorus, that fuel that algae use to grow. And the water that would be directed to Weber Pond through this infrastructure is water that would likely make its way there anyway. It would just take a detour through basements and backyards on its way there. So I don't think we're adding any more water than would potentially, most of it would end up in that space anyway. It would kind of travel from west to east before it outlets toward Minneapolis. As far as managing blue-green algae, our strategy to reduce that is to really manage phosphorus. And we think with an improvement here for flood protection, that is a real opportunity to layer in some water quality benefits too. So we think that some of this could help prevent some of that phosphorus pollution and slow water down and prevent erosion. And we can layer in some of those water quality benefits. So I think that could enhance the pond and the water quality of the pond from its current state. And I'll mention too that Weber Pond is a stormwater pond, so if it's collecting phosphorus in that space, that is a concentrated place where we can manage it and remove it. So I think that is another strategy, is to essentially collect it there, and then we can manage it in that space.
Thanks, Jessica. Along the same lines, how resilient is this infrastructure in a changing climate? How long can we expect this level of protection?
Right. Maybe Corey, you could talk a little bit about the higher storm modeling that we've done here. You might have the best gut for that question.
I've give it a shot. So we've looked a lot, commonly historically, at the 1% annual chance event occurring, and what does that do on the landscape? Right now, that's about 7.5 inches in 24 hours in this particular area. Projections can give you many different numbers, but commonly for the 1% chance event in the future, that number goes up to about 10 inches in 24 hours. And that's why we've been modeling the now 0.2% chance event, which is about 10 inches. We have been taking that larger event into account and seeing the impacts and understanding how this new infrastructure would hold up under that condition. It's more water, there's more water all over the place, but this infrastructure reduces the flooding under existing conditions for even that event.
So over time, as the climate changes, if the current trends remain, we're going to see those bigger storms come. And, if we put it in day one, it was providing a benefit for say the 2% annual chance. We might be able to predict, or it may come to be that in 50 years at, the end of its life cycle, it's providing a little less than that. But in the meantime, it's definitely better than the existing conditions.
All right, thank you. We have a question about, let's see, about Weber Woods. There's already a shortage of natural paths in Edina. It seems that every proposal involved destruction of most of the Weber Woods. How does the Edina City Council plan to address decreasing natural trails? And are there any current proposals that spare this valuable natural resource?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So this idea hasn't really, come forward yet and hasn't made it to council. So we won't speak to what they're going to do. But when it comes to the goal that was set out for this design team, which was to look at flooding, yeah, I think we've talked to a lot of folks about those woods and the wetlands and the green spaces. There's a lot of love for green spaces, and especially when we have only a certain amount of parks and a certain amount of woods and trails. Any trade-off that might reduce that is one of concern. I think when it comes to the opportunities that we see as a design team, we look at trails, we look at parks and green spaces and people's connection to it as a real opportunity. We think we can improve the connection west to east, north to south through that space. Leave it natural in places. Take some of the areas that are natural now and actually enhance the habitat benefit. Jessica described it to me as going from the 2-star hotel to the 4-star hotel. If you're a turtle, a frog, or a woodpecker. But clearly during the construction, we want to be very sensitive to those issues. And whatever options come out of this design process, we're going to be vetting with our regulators and our project partners to make sure that it's done in a way that's sensitive and that can provide the most of those ancillary benefits as possible.
You've talked a little bit about this, but what makes this problem so challenging?
Water isn't compressible, and we have to find a real place to store it. And if we don't find a good place to store it, it'll find its own place. That's my gut reaction. Corey, what do you think? Why is this so hard?
Yeah, this area used to be wetland I think as the storms get bigger, water, as Ross pointed out, is going to re-find those same places and those same ways through. And what we're finding is that way through is west to east, right through that 41st corridor, right through the middle of the neighborhood, and being stored in all the little pockets that you find throughout the neighborhood. And there are a lot of homes that sit very low. And so to get the water from where it is today low enough to protect those homes requires a lot.
We just had a question come in. Will the level of the lowered ponds be below the water table?
That's a good question too. So right now we are in the field with a contract that's going to be informing our further design. We've taken soil borings throughout the park, and we have some monitoring equipment to monitor groundwater. It's called a piezometer, and we'll be installing another one of those somewhere on the west side of the neighborhood as well. So we're going to be getting a good sense for some of those groundwater elevations. We talked about with the expert panel, what does it mean if we're getting closer to groundwater with those current pond elevations, or if we're actually into the groundwater with those pond elevations. And while we didn't see any full stops, there definitely would be more caution from our side if we were into the water table. So generally in this area, we know that the water table is close to the ground, somewhere. The initial borings that we have show that it is down there, but we don't think it's right at the pond elevation, although with its current raised state, it might be somewhere close. So we're going to proceed with caution on that one and make sure that we're considering any potential risk to groundwater as well. So typically those surface waters could be connected, or they do infiltrate into the groundwater. So not just for water quality, but for just the level of the water itself.
What are the diameters of number 9 for good, better, and best?
Help me, Corey. I have no idea.
Number 9, the long stretch of pipe to the south.
That was let's just say the pipe on 42nd Street, somewhere in the middle between Weber Pond and Crocker, when it's at its biggest.
Yep. And the biggest option, a lot of that pipe on 42nd and Crocker is all the way up to 60-inch or 5 foot, that capacity. For the next level down option, some of that pipe is dropped down to 48-inch. And then some of the lead pipes up at the Morningside and Branson areas are down around 24-inch or 36. And then, of course, for the big or the smallest option that we showed, the pipes stay that same size where they're 60 on 42nd and 48-inch on Crocker, but just don't extend as far.
Great. Another question came in. Is there a reason there is no change to the pipes and catch basins at the bottom of Grimes Hill at 42nd?
The bottom of Grimes Hill at 42nd.
I think I can try that. At the intersection of Grimes and 42nd is where the bigger pipe runs through. And so there is larger pipe there, and there are additional catch basins at that intersection. Just north of 42nd, there may be a low spot on Grimes adjacent to the park. There we tried to create connectivity from the street directly into that swale into the park.
Great. There is no report regarding how many homes will have increased risk in the summary slide. Does this mean no homes will have increased risk?
For our summary slide, I showed the leftmost column was existing conditions or status quo, and the label was structures removed or reduced risk. So if we changed nothing, we wouldn't see any structures removed, or we wouldn't see any reduced risk. I think that's what we're trying to show is the no benefit or no change.
And maybe to that, one of the goals was that no home would have increased risk with the project. And that's part of the balancing act we've been trying to do is reduce it for people, but not have increases for anybody.
Thank you, yeah.
Here's a question for Corey. Are the storms defined according to the NOAA updated standards, taking into account more extreme events?
Yeah, the most up-to-date available information we have is NOAA's Atlas 14, and the 20% through the 0.2% are based on that. And we were running 24-hour storms.
Corey, you just answered the question without any shock or surprise, but I think we've got an engineer in the neighborhood. You got to introduce yourself.
I guess yes is the answer. We are using the most up-to-date precipitation records.
And what did the question mean? Yeah.
Here's another one. As we think about the costs of good, better, best, how many total homes are in the Morningside neighborhood? You mentioned that a neighborhood of this size would typically warrant 4 to 6 million in spending, roughly speaking. How do you think about that? And what about that sizing?
Right. So that is my best effort right now, just to, ballpark or gut check that level of investment. So when I think about our total capital program for infrastructure, that is, let's say a half of the current stormwater fee goes into new capital infrastructure. We're doing 2 major street reconstructions, and if we're thinking about those reconstructions going on, citywide on a 50 or 60-year rotating basis, as infrastructure gets old, we renew it. The current yearly value of that new infrastructure is about $2 million. The size of these neighborhoods compared to that $2 million bite every year might warrant kind of a status quo investment somewhere between 4 and 6 million. If we wanted to go bigger than that, let's say it was more along the lines of the 10 million, that would bring up questions about the longevity of that funding source. You can do that a few times, but then if we got to a point where 5 years from now, we had already, committed all the resources, then we would get to a year where we come to a neighborhood, like Morningside, and they may have similar flood risk issues, and we'd want to provide them with a similar service, that we'd say, nope, the money's all gone. So I think in the end, that would just get us thinking about bigger picture issues with the funding source. And that's something that we've been continually kind of, back checking with our utility rate studies. And I think it's kind of it's an open question.
Why do you show a $2 million cost if none of the options are done?
Right. I didn't explain that slide very well, so maybe I can go back to it. See if I can get it coming up here. I don't know how to do that. All right, I'm going to share my screen first. Then I'm going to put this over there and navigate to the slide. Okay, so this is the summary slide again. Yes, I should have spent more time on this slide preparing it. So I'm looking over on my screen to the right where the slide is here, so forgive me. I think $2 million right now is, when I think about the infrastructure that is out there in place and the improvements that we're already going to do on in the stormwater utility, we think that that's about $2 million. Part of that is the curbs on the street. Part of it is new pipes for sump pump flows. But some of it is repairing and replacing the existing system that's out there. We think that their status quo, there's about a $2 million investment as it is. The alternative, I guess, to, or the thing that I'm thinking about with the status quo slide is, status quo is in 2 years when that street reconstruction comes up, we just do whatever we do now. We don't go and think about this like we're doing in this project. Some of the, if we were to think about what $5 million looks like compared to this too, some of this is savings, but most of it is not. So we don't have to repair the pipe on 42nd Street, or maybe we have to modify the pipe between Monterey and Grimes. There's going to be small overlaps of savings. Similarly, there'll be some overlaps and savings between the projects themselves. So if we already have to open up an area to do the street projects, we're getting all sorts of savings as it is for restoration with these projects. But I wanted to at least say that we do have a $2 million investment coming. We still have to do more work in the design process to figure out how much of that $5 million cost is over and above. And my gut says it's most of it, because there's, that 42nd Street pipe, the Crocker pipe, those might be ones that we're not going to repair. So it would come out of this 2 million, but it would, come out of that 5 million or 10 million. Can you guys help me translate me? Does that make sense? Good.
Thanks, Russ. We have a question for Corey here. Has deepening the existing Weber Pond or the Weber Woods expansion been considered to hold more water and less surface area?
Sorry, Cole, can you ask it one more time? It broke up a bit.
Sure. Has deepening the existing Weber Pond or the Weber Woods expansion been considered to hold more water and less surface area?
Yeah. Okay. In the biggest option, you see we've both expanded the surface area and we've deepened it to try and do both and get volume in both directions. One important aspect that one of the questions brought up earlier was the groundwater level. If we lower Weber Pond too far and groundwater is above where we lower it to, the pond itself will continually be a sink and groundwater will flow into it all the time, meaning we would have to be pumping it out all the time. So there is a limit on how low we can go. And we picked a level, as we're learning about the groundwater now, we picked a level to go at and then expanded as far as we needed to. And as Ross mentioned, basically used as much of the low part of the woods as we could at this point.
Yeah, I would only clarify to say when we're talking about pond depth, usually we're like thinking about here's the surface of the water, and then if we were to go and stand in it or jump into it, here's where our feet are touching. And what we've done with the pond in this example is actually lowered both levels. So while the depth may remain the same or get a little bit deeper, we're actually bringing the whole level down from that existing level. And that's what, so if we've got a 4-acre pond and we need 70 acre feet, or, let's make it an easy number, we need 40 acre feet, could we just take that 4-acre pond and put shear walls on it and just bring it down 10 feet? Well, no, I think there's a limitation to that because right now when you think about the ponds, there's going to have nice gradual slopes into them. Our model's a little bit simplistic there. We probably do model it more like, square walled, but it's really going to be, nice gradual slopes. So when you have an area the size of Weber Woods or Weber Pond, like with those gradual slopes going down, eventually you get to this point where you can't go any deeper. Or you have to start doing things like putting retaining walls on the sides and knows whatever else. So I think we wanted to do it in a way that was balanced, that we thought was constructible, that wasn't getting us into a whole bunch of other costs or didn't look just unnatural.
And I'll add just one more thing to that too. Even if you have a pond with a really where the bottom is 10 feet deeper or something really extreme, the surface, the water level has to be a lot lower too to actually have space for more water to come in. So then you'd be like looking down a hole at a pond that's 10 feet down. If you have a deeper bottom but you don't bring down the water level, then you're not creating any extra space.
Yeah. Some of those things too would, if you really started to get to extremes, would start to really compromise some of the aesthetic value and some of the natural resource values as well. So I think the levels that we're talking about here, either 3 or 5 foot deeper in the bigger or the biggest example, we want to make sure that we could build those and that they're going to be something that's going to be an amenity to the community, and people will look on it with favor rather than, what is this engineered stormwater monstrosity? You want to look at it and say, oh, that's a great natural space for ducks and everything else. I love when the eagle comes to visit, not like nice rock lined thing you got there.
Thank you. Next question coming in, Corey Ross. You can fight over this one. With the installation of the box culvert from Kipling to Grimes in Weber Park, is the replacement of the existing driveways, landscape, and planting being replaced as part of the proposed cost?
Right. Yeah, so the Monterey to Lynn, the Kipling to Grimes, those box culverts, they're big and they're definitely going to have a construction impact. I would see any construction impacts and the restoration of those impacts as part of the project. And they do travel in either right-of-way space or easement space. But those are right-of-way and easement spaces that people treat as their front or side yards right now. So we want to be really sensitive about both their installation and the restoration of those. I think in the end, 3 years down the line, you don't want to even know that that thing went in place. Only the people who watched it go in and know it's there will have the memory and the story of what it looked like when it was open. But it will, we don't want to soar on the landscape from either the facility itself or the construction.
Thanks. Where does the proposed pipe go from Crocker Avenue and Morningside Road to Branson? Branson and Morningside don't intersect.
There's a street I'm missing, isn't there? North and south? Is it Grimes again?
Yeah. Yes, it's Grimes. So the pipe comes south on Crocker and goes east on Morningside. And then it has a connection on Grimes that goes south further, and then it connects through, then creating connection on Branson there. So it kind of loops around using Grimes to connect those.
Yeah. So yeah, when I was talking, I was saying it goes from Crocker to Morningside and around to Branson. I was forgetting what that name of that street was up there, but yeah, it's probably Grimes.
Mhm.
Next question is, what is the size of the fund? Will the Morningside project be viewed as taking away resources from other neighborhoods?
The size of the fund. I don't think, the Stormwater Utility Fund, I guess we don't have a readout on the balance of it, but I don't know if I've got a good answer for that, or maybe we've sort of covered it already with the prior discussion about, how big. I think when we get, anywhere past that 4 to 6 million, it might start to be seen as, being taken away. But on the other hand, Morningside's the only neighborhood that we have this level of detail for. And we're right now in the middle of a study where we're updating our comprehensive water resource management plan to roll in 4 other neighborhoods that have some major flooding issues as well. So we might know a little bit more about, some of the other key areas and their needs too. But yeah, this is our first time through to this level of depth, so it's going to be hard to say, how needs compare neighborhood to neighborhood. I was just comparing it against what I know about the overall funding source and that capital plan year to year.
Thanks. What have you heard from council so far on the project?
So when did we last go to council, Jessica, for this project?
Oh boy, it feels like ages ago. I can tell you here in just a moment.
It was when we were previewing the scenarios, just prior to previewing the scenarios, right?
Yeah, that was September, so 2 days before our last meeting with the neighborhood.
Yep. Yeah, so we previewed with council some of the scenarios, talked a little bit about, where we are in terms of the engagement process. But until, and then we've got a lot of work with the design side and directly with the public. We haven't checked back with the council on this option, so they haven't seen it. So hot off the presses, we're going straight from the design team to the public. That's how I like to do it. We're jumping without feet.
I'll add on to that too. I think the last time that we were talking with the council, they had a lot of questions about what the neighborhood thought and felt about the options. So I think they're just as curious to hear about what the neighborhood's reaction is to these options. And I'm sure they will ask us again the next time we bring something to them. So this might be a good segue into my pitch about, how to participate or how to provide some feedback or reaction to the option that we've shown you tonight. So I'm going to share my screen briefly here and just bring you back to the Better Together webpage. I'll go back to the front of it here about where you can tell us what you think. We are going to post a recording of the video, and then we'll post the PowerPoint presentation that Ross and Corey delivered tonight, so you can look at that in a lot more detail and process that. And then there are several ways that you can provide your reactions and your ideas and your feedback. We have an ideas tab, so this is kind of a free form, public facing, add your idea or your thought or your comment. We have a survey option. So if you want to tell us what you think, but you don't necessarily want to just post it on a board, that's another way to make sure that we get your feedback, that staff gets your feedback, and that gets incorporated. But it's not like something that other people could comment directly onto. And then there's a stories tab and a map. So you can share a story, share a picture, drop a pin on a map and tell us about a special place in the neighborhood that we need to know more about. And then of course you can always give a call or email directly to staff, and we'd be happy to meet with you on site using, employing all those social distancing measures to stay safe. We really want to hear from you. I think this is, we've put together our most detailed option to date, and as things get a little bit more detail, we know that that's when there's a lot more stuff for people to react to. So we want to hear what you think about that, and all of that we take in will inform that next step with City Council, which is to tell them not only what's technically feasible, but also what the community is most supportive of or least supportive of as we get to an option and make a recommendation for them, and then they ultimately make that decision.
Thank you, Jessica. We've just hit 6:30, so we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a good evening, and please reach out to us with more information and ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you.